Yo, I'm halfway on the second episode of the Colin Kaepernick thing. 6 episode series on Netflix. Um, I just saw a clip of it on Twitter where, where he was talking about at the very beginning, comparing how to make it into football to chattel slavery. I was on Twitter when I saw it, and I felt like, well, I have to watch it since I commented so strongly about it. I don't think we can't compare anything to that. Like, even when they compare the Holocaust and the Native Americans losing their damn near genocide committed against them, you just can't compare anything to chattels, the chattel slavery of Western Africans. I'm never comfortable with comparing anything to that. I think it's definitely the worst series of events that have ever taken place in the last 2,000 years. Again, it's groups of people that were stripped of their families and cultures, and not to mention put into slavery. We're comparing that to football players. And now this is a touchy subject because people who agree with it, I've heard like Rasheed Wallace say something like that before, like the NBA is like slavery for whatever reason. It's just, no, you work for someone. They make the rules. And I guess the process that he was referring to was the poking and the prodding and basically like testing out the players and their flaws and deficiencies. I mean, so if it was an all-black organization, the NFL, and they were still doing that, would you still feel like a slave? And again, not to say that too many old white men own too many NFL teams. Too many white people do have too much authoritative positions in the NFL. You didn't even touch on that part. I think that's what makes it uncomfortable, or we should be touching on that. So far, it feels like a Disney-like series, so I get that part about it. The ending of the first episode was beyond corny, but because he's talking about how the braids, that part was interesting about the first episode, where he explains how he didn't know how to rebel from being a child, and he had braids initially because Allen Iverson was his favorite player, and he got braids, but his parents are white, so they were uncomfortable with anything black apparently. I don't know if that was made for dramatic purposes, but it's his story. So if that's true, then you just got to believe him for what it is. And he, had an awakening at 28 years old. He said 14 years later, after he was forced to remove his braids, and I feel like a lot of white people were against it that were in authoritative positions. His parents, his baseball coach is the one that called his parents. I'm pretty sure if he was around more black people, then of course he would, have, they would have felt more comfortable. And his black parent, if he had black parents, they probably would have fought against that. We can't even say that. I would say open-minded parents. Look at the story with The Blind Side. The Blind Side story is amazing. They adopted the kid, Michael Orr, he was from a poor neighborhood. He was from the hood. And in a lot of ways, they were poking and prodding. In the book, The Blind Side, Michael Lewis's book, The Blind Side, he explains how they do comb through these neighborhoods and look for basically borderline criminals. because those are the ones who are crazy enough to play football. That's the way he was kind of like telling the story in The Blind Side. So we having a white family adopting a black kid from the hood there, and it's a total opposite of this. So it's almost like Colin Kaepernick is making a blanketed statement about being a biracial kid. He doesn't explain, like, I don't think he ever touches on being adopted, because none of his parents are black. I would have thought at least the mom or the father was. But look at the contrast between The Blind Side and Colin Kaepernick's story. Just can't. Everybody's story is not your story. And that's what I'm getting. It's a little uncomfortable with that. I think that's what I always speak to, like Colin Kaepernick, and even with Kyrie Irving, like you're preaching to this crowd, and it becomes opportunistic, whether it's intentional or not. That's what I feel. I think it's opportunistic for you to make. You got a Netflix deal off of this. You made money from Nike. You got a settlement with the NFL. You turned down the player option. It's just tough, man. That's nobody. There was no. This is the same system that you were able to benefit off of, that you're calling, you're comparing to slavery. How can that be? How can that be? How can it be the same exact system you just compared to slavery? No slave ever made out with this much. No matter if they were able to escape, there was no escape route for them to land on that pot of gold. I just think this is unfortunate and completely one-sided. So I'm 2 episodes in the middle of the second episode of this thing, and I just hope we could. I don't know. I would love to go back and forth with someone about just. I would love to be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think Colin Kaepernick is preaching to one side. If you want to blanket it and call it the Black Lives Matter side, and you got Trump on the other side, who he clearly puts himself in opposition of, who is another guy who preaches to a whole group, a whole gang, and they were right about that. He called the protesters in front of the White House thugs during the COVID thing, and when George Floyd died or got killed, he considered those protesters thugs. These guys on January 6th, they went over there under his name, and he didn't consider them thugs. So I understand that, and Trump is dead wrong about a bunch of stuff that he says. He's almost always wrong the way he speaks, especially when he has no script and off the cuff. But my issue is that they're both speaking to these opposing parties, and where is the bridge? Where's the table? Where's the oracle that the representatives can come and sit down and negotiate, some sort of remedy about the differences and misunderstandings, or the blatant wrongness of both sides? Where is that? Nobody's given that opportunity. And those two guys are emblematic or symptomatic of the issue, the repetitiveness, the repetition in the messaging that pushes for separation. And everyone's talking about, a lot of Republicans are talking about ceding the country, states ceding, not participating in the country anymore. The message for everyone is separation. They want a civil war. And to me, you have those two guys. Colin Kaepernick seems almost harmless. He's passive in his speech. He always seems calm. I never even seen this guy angry. You know what I mean? So it doesn't seem like he's a bad dude. But I think he goes about things wrongly. There's just a different way that he can go about this and show a different way of leadership. And Trump is obviously an opportunist. Like, what Colin Kaepernick, how he has made money, how he's able to see a lot of his money post career, post football career. In a lot of ways, it was based on, again, the same system that he's comparing to slavery, and it's opportunistic, regardless if he knows it or not. And Trump, we know he's an opportunist at minimum. So you got so many opportunists on both sides. Once they gain a certain amount of popularity and celebrity, they utilize that to continue to make money, to gain more power, and doing so, they beyond compound the issues. They beyond. There's no. It becomes more problematic. And that's my biggest issue with everyone. Like, I don't understand. I speak to everyone every day at my job, wherever I'm at. To me, it doesn't matter who you are. I should be able to make fun of you. You should be able to make fun of me. If we can't do that, if we can't play around like that, then we should be able to respect each other. We should be able to, I'm guilty of overreacting. I'm sure anyone else has. But all this stuff is just, it's uncomfortable, and not because for the reasons that he would think. It's uncomfortable because it's preaching separation. And not to say that he's wrong about the history of Western African descendants in this country. He's not wrong about most of this stuff. I think he's wrong about his approach, about the present and the future, and preaching about the solutions, which it shouldn't be a 6-part Netflix series. It should be a 6-part financial literacy thing. I guess my last point before I forget, something like this Netflix special could have been promoted even more if he had just went back to the league. And I know that he feels like the contracts that they offered him were messed up. Maybe. But I think that was a huge misstep. I think when you compare him to Muhammad Ali, that's a big issue for me. It's Ali risked his freedom, and he always knew how to rebel. So there was no issue for him to rebel when against the Vietnam War, and it wasn't an inconsistency with Muhammad Ali's character. So when Colin Kaepernick did it, it felt inconsistent for me from the beginning, because he was sitting down, he was basically benched. Jim Harbaugh was the coach, who I think he resigned, or he didn't re-sign with the 49ers, and he really knew how to. He was able to utilize Colin Kaepernick a lot better than the other coaches would have. He had a game plan for him, and anytime you have a great talent, especially at quarterback, and you have a great coach, a high level coach, high level talent at quarterback, that's a recipe for greatness. And they made it to a Super Bowl. And while Colin Kaepernick was, again, reaping the fruits of the capitalistic system, reaping the fruits off of his supposed slavery that the NFL is, kissing his forearm, shining on the covers of all these magazines, in the Super Bowl, the same Super Bowl, that there was only one person protesting or preaching or showing black awareness and pushing for it. And they weren't an NFL player. That was Beyonce. She did a Black Panther reenactment, which was dope. She didn't violate anyone. People felt uncomfortable by it. If they did, they're silly. They're always going to be silly. But the biggest mistake Colin Kaepernick has made is not going back to the NFL. Because Muhammad Ali would have never not went back. He would have never fought that. He would have made sure, all right, maybe you can't protest. I don't know what the the rules would have been against him, but you couldn't avoid the guy with the afro that we know that might be portrayed as a villain, and then he has a Netflix special coming out. It's all about promoting the righteousness. It's all about promoting your message. And sometimes as you're learning how to rebelling is not like the easiest process. When you're fighting against an entire room of people with one argument, it can get really intense. So imagine you feeling like you're against the world. It can only be intense. So he treated that negotiation with the NFL the same way, and he kind of cut his nose to spite his face. I'm gonna finish this up, but I don't know if I'm gonna like it already. I don't know if I like it already. I don't know if I'm finished liking it.